So where are you guys in starting your process?
So this is pretty much the beginning of this committee met. Dave, how many times did you meet before some of us got on?
Maybe 3 times.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And then, we've sort of formed the full committee and had one other speaker and sort of read some other plans, things like that. So we're really just gathering as much information as we can right now.
And your other speaker was David Fink, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, so you have a little bit of a tough act to follow.
I was gonna say.
Yeah.
He was fantastic.
We learned a lot from him, and he gave us a lot of resources too. So
He's
Yeah,
great.
I'm sorry I missed that one because I would have actually liked to have heard him speak, but I think I'm going to have an opportunity anyways to meet with him, so, which is great.
I think you can watch it, not to put pressure on you.
That's
Yeah.
That's a new age where you can watch everything after. So
Unless you forget to record it.
Yeah.
Right.
So I mentioned to Mary Jo at the beginning, we are recording this meeting. So if you want to tell any secrets, probably today's not the day. But so it has been recorded now, and we broadcast ours to YouTube too.
Thank you for that heads up, because
You're
my
welcome.
frontal lobe doesn't always engage.
That might
As
be more
Mary Jo
fun
can
though,
attest.
Liza.
probably a good rule of thumb when you're on computer, never really tell your secrets. I think, are we all here? Is that?
Yeah, I think maybe, like I said, maybe just Crystal, but she may jump on a little bit late, so we could probably get started.
Okay. All right. So why don't we begin? Why don't we just call this meeting to order? And I want to apologize. Roz did great minutes last time and volunteered to do it, and we really appreciate it. And she sent them to Dave and to me, but we realized we did not send them to the committee. So that won't happen again. We will make sure you get minutes. Of course, last time the minutes were not so extensive because it was David Fink spoke, but we will just approve those at the next meeting, I think. And so are really what we have up today. Oh, and I'm sorry, Peter, you had volunteered. And
I have my pen in my hand. I'm ready to roll.
I'm wondering if somebody's willing to volunteer for the next time, and you don't have to do it. Oh, Andrea, thank you. Okay. And then what we'll do is we'll have a list. I'll get a list together, and so we don't have to do this. We'll just, each one of us will take a turn. With that, I want to thank the speakers who came today, because we are, as we just said, we are just in the information gathering stage, and we learned a lot from David Fink. And we know that you have a lot to offer us. And I don't know, David, if you wanted to introduce them more, since you're the one who knows them and invited them here to say.
Sure. So I don't know, Liza, I don't think you and I have met directly. I know I met your husband before, and I've heard about you, but
Sorry.
yeah, no. So actually, David Fink, I had reached out after our meeting to David to ask, who from the town of Guilford should we invite to talk to us, because this group had expressed an interest in trying to understand a little bit better what Guilford had done in terms of their community outreach efforts for affordable housing. So right away, he mentioned Mary Jo and Liza as two folks that he would think would be great for us to speak to, as well as Sandy. I think Mary Jo, you said Sandy was down in Florida, so may or may
She's
not.
traveling, yeah, so.
Yeah. And so I'll actually, because I don't know everything about either Mary Jo or Liza, so I'll allow them to introduce themselves if that's okay.
Sure. Do you want to start, Liza?
Oh, okay. So I'm Liza Jansen Petra, and I'm the executive director of the Guilford Foundation. I'm also the executive director of the Branford Community Foundation, but I'm wearing my Guilford hat today. And I've known Mary Jo for a long time, and she was on the board of directors when the kernel of the idea of trying to promote affordable housing in Guilford came on board. So I'm excited to share the information that we have and what worked for us. So thanks.
And I'm an architect in Guilford, and I do mostly residential work. So I've always been interested in housing. And it's very difficult to develop affordable housing on the shoreline, as probably you have discovered. And so when I was a member on the Guilford Foundation, it was an initiative for us. And I figured I would lend my shoulder to the wheel. And it is a continuing effort.
So MJ, I feel like the Guilford Foundation's aspect was really in the beginning of the process. So do you want me to like sort of lay the groundwork and then you can take on from what happened from there?
I think that would be nice.
Does that make sense? Okay. So our getting involved in affordable housing through the Guilford Foundation. And then let me just back up for a minute, just so we're all on the same page about what our foundation is. We are a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to connect people who care with the causes that matter. And we do that by raising private dollars and then distributing and then pooling those funds, investing them, and then investing them into an investment pool. And then, oh, I just saw your husband.
Yeah, he's here.
Sorry, I'm distracted. Squirrel. And then we grant out a portion of those funds every year. So we do grant making, but we also do leadership initiatives around issues like housing, like race and equity, and other fuel we did. So that's sort of us, who we are is a community foundation. We focus specifically on Guilford. And so way back in 2012, so almost 10 years ago, which is crazy, we decided that we wanted to have some more specific data around where we should be putting our investments in the community, what was actually happening in Guilford. And one of the key service needs that was identified through that survey was a lack of affordable housing, specifically a lack of a diversity of housing. So there were very few options for college students, college graduates to come back and try to, there were no like starter homes for folks. There were no step down homes for folks who wanted to downsize from a larger home. And so it just became this issue. So we wanted to better understand that because that was just one factor of this study that we did. And so we sort of honed in on that. And in 2013, we did a couple of big sessions where we brought together local organizations and business leaders to talk about the issue. So, to say, look, this is what the survey said. What do you see? What do your clients see? And pretty much everyone was like, yeah, it's impossible to get someone if they're getting evicted. It's impossible to find them a place to live. And this also included developers and others. And so we sort of realized we had hit on something. And then we also realized that this was a huge issue and it was just going to take a long time to try to figure it out. And we also acknowledged that the Guilford Foundation is and could never be sort of the affordable housing experts in the community. What we could do was facilitate and move forward, hopefully, the issue. So we did 3 things over the course of the next couple of years. The first was that we really tried to identify a nonprofit organization within the community or any organization in the community that could sort of lead the charge, right? So who could be the experts on housing? Who could really understand and like work with someone like David Fink to really understand the needs, the cycles, the zoning, and just really focus intensely on that and figure out funding. So we resuscitated a group called the Guilford Interfaith Housing Group to mixed, I think, success. I think another group has stepped into that lead. So that was one thing that we did. The other is that we facilitated and helped the town of Guilford apply for a state of Connecticut Department of Housing grant for $25,000 to identify potential parcels within the community that could support multifamily. So this was a first for the town and we were just helping sort of push that along. And then the third thing that the foundation did was we committed to focusing on funding as one of our priority areas. Focusing on housing as one of our funding priority areas, I should say. Now that's a little complicated for us because we're a small foundation. We're giving out about $120,000 now, but that doesn't create affordable housing, you know. So our grants were really around emergency assistance for rents, for mortgages, et cetera. So that's really where our role was. And we continue to try to be advocates and supporters within the community, using our influence and our, ability to try to dispel myths and rumors around what affordable housing is and what it means and its impact on the community. But the vast majority of the efforts have been done by Mary Jo and others on a committee. So I think I'll segue it over to you, MJ, to take it on from there. If I missed anything, it's been a long time. So if I missed
I know. Well, what I'm going to say is the one thing other thing that you did that I think was very influential is that we actually applied for a grant to get involved with the Partnership for Strong Communities in making a huge public education initiative around housing. And, we talk about it as affordable housing, but I'm sure, as David said, it's really workforce housing. I mean, there's very little housing in Connecticut that is affordable in our towns. It's a big ask for people to start living here. And so I think that to get a little bit past the stigma of the word affordable is a big part of the dialogue with the community, because if you say senior housing, nobody bats an eye. And if you talk to somebody about their kid getting out of college needing an apartment, everybody has that problem. So I think that, one of the things that we did through a grant from the Guilford Foundation is get the Partnership for Strong Communities involved with our public outreach. And through that, we also reached out to the businesses and groups that got involved with the Guilford Foundation with the different needs surveys and asked them if they would help. And our local hardware store has, young and old people who help out there on a part-time basis, and they need help. And, school teachers see kids who the parents get divorced. They want to keep the kids in the system. They need to downsize their housing. How do we find a place for these families? And they all started to tell their stories. And that was the video that I think David alluded to. That we did, and it just made it very real for people. These are situations that everybody has or can connect to, and it just made it easier to talk about. And I think that really needs to happen as a community discussion about what you need, because when you say affordable housing, everybody pictures the 50 townhouses or something like that, and maybe that's not the best fit for your town. If we don't have sewers, we're probably not going to get that anyway. So I think it's, important to take a deep breath and have people talk, pretty honestly about what they do need. So that was very interesting what came out of that.
Yeah.
Did you want to?
Well, I would support that information. I mean, we really started from a place of community need and responding to that versus, coming at it from, we want to build affordable housing. I will say, I do think that it's important to acknowledge sort of the changing of our society from 10 years ago. There is, I think, I'm throwing a curveball in here, but that's what I do.
I like this.
And that is,
I know where you're going.
Yeah. And that is that, we had concerns, I mean, frankly, about folks being concerned about people from New Haven moving in. And, looking back and reflecting on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and some of the social justice work that has happened, particularly over the last year, I wonder if we made a mistake or a misstep in not sort of acknowledging that increasing diversity in our communities is also a good thing. So, now when I look at that video, and I'm happy to share it with you, I still think it's fabulous. We have, a librarian in there with this great conversation with her father. It was like, yeah, Katie moved back to Guilford and she's a great roommate, but I'd kind of like her out of the house. It's really great, but it sort of just reinforces that, we want more people like us to move into the community, which, it makes sense. But there's also this other aspect that we are segregating, continuing to promote segregation in our communities by not having housing that is affordable to folks of low income or other income. So I, take that for what it's worth and whether or not that's important to your community. But I do think it is, I think, as we continue to explore issues of race and equity, that's something that you might consider in terms of the strengths that a diversity of housing would provide. And,
Mhm.
and Jay, I don't know how you feel about that. But
No, I think that's right. I think initially we just wanted to sell it. We wanted to go. We wanted it to be supported by a majority of the community. And so we downplayed that. And in hindsight, we were like, you know what, we missed a big opportunity there. We could have done this better.
Yeah. And there was a little bit of a pushback later when we talked about this, but again, I think that, but what really did work though, was like bringing the community along with us, just like, saying, look, it's impossible for folks it's very difficult for people to move in or downsize or live in our community. And that is a problem. And folks are like, yeah, that's right. And we had business leaders, we had, we had folks of all political stripes. We had Republicans, we had Democrats, all acknowledging and agreeing that this was an issue. And so we were really able, I think, to make it not a polarizing situation, but just an actual dilemma and urgency in the community that just simply needed to be addressed. So then by the time we began to do some of the studies, or the town began to do some of the studies, and we were very transparent, or it was just to come to these meetings, please, enjoy these initial discussions. And so that first parcel study that the town did through looking at seven possible unit. I am clearly not an architect, but 7 possible areas in the town. And they were assessed based on access to public transportation. We don't have sewers. So it was, is it possible to have a septic? Is it, all of these factors, which then ultimately led to the Whitfield location. And so people had been, we had this slow on-ramp of, oh, okay, housing is a problem. Here are parcels in our community that could possibly work. And now we're honing in on this one. And, there people did come and get scared, or not scared, but concerned, brought their concerns at each step of the way. And I think because of the transparency and because of the sort of openness, we were able to bring people in who really supported the idea, as well as diffuse some of the concerns about what affordable housing really means. And I don't think it got super contentious until the very, very last town meeting. And that was a misstep, I think, when I think we sort of didn't do the groundwork for some of the immediate neighbors around the property that we could have done. We just assumed everyone was with us by that point, I don't know, MJ, maybe you have a different perspective on that.
No, I think that's right. I mean, these things, so we actually got 2 grants from the state. The first was to look for a parcel, and then the second was to evaluate the parcel for suitability. And so each of those things takes like a year. And then, it's followed by, our committee meeting, and then, a town meeting to talk about it. And some residents came and said, well, I'm concerned about this. I live in this area. And some residents came and said, well, when can I move in? Am I going to be eligible? Why is this taking so long? And so we heard a lot of really heartbreaking stories about people who are on a list for the affordable housing in town, which is basically closed because there aren't any units. The units don't turn over. So we have like 100 and something units, and the waiting list is 300 people long, and you have to wait 5 years. It's like not a viable thing. We could fill anything we can build, but we just can't. And so people move. They move out of town, and it's firefighters, widows and stuff. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, that's actually, I just want to jump in there to say, I also don't think folks actually realized how many affordable housing units were already in the community and clearly doing a good job. So that was another part of sort of the, the education and information sharing to say, look, we already have these units here and we all love town. So maybe there's nothing to be that scared of.
And maybe you're the same. Our housing that we have in town is for seniors and disabled or developmentally disabled persons. And so if you are, a younger person or a family, there's no affordable housing that's accessible to you in town.
Well,
we have the NeighborWorks New Horizons that they have 29 units, I think, that they operate in Guilford, and basically all that got developed in the 60s, and that was a volunteer group that put their heart and soul into it for so many years and then just petered out. They haven't built anything in
that scatter site.
Yeah, scatter site, which is ideal in our estimation.
Oh, and actually, MJ, that was another great thing that happened. Sorry, I just want to part of our group, we actually had someone who had grown up in those housing projects. That's not even what it is. Had grown up in one of these houses, and who was a successful businessman now. And he just said, "This is, my mom got divorced, and this was the way we were able to stay in Guilford." And all right, I'll mute now.
Well, I know I appreciate. I just wanted to real briefly just jump in because you hit on a couple of different things that I think is really I know helpful for me. And first of all, I don't know if you're aware, I'm the first selectman of Madison, Peggy Lyons, and actually this is the first time I've attended one of these meetings. I'm just here as a guest today. I'm not a permanent member, and Aaron Ducasse represents the Board of Selectmen for the committee. And so I appreciate you coming forward and sharing your story. And I do want to thank also the people who are serving on the committee, because I know this is a big time commitment. And it's also a controversial topic. So I think it takes a lot of fortitude to tackle this as we move forward. And I appreciate hearing some of the background, because one of the things when I was thinking about what is the goals and objectives of this committee, part of this was driven out of an obligation that we have required by the state to complete this plan. But I think, we're not doing this just because we have to do it. I think we also recognize that there is a need in the community, and trying to find what is the right balance between, what we're required to do versus what the community wants and will support, right? Because we don't want to face the mobs of people with pitchforks coming into public hearings and trying to fight against things. We want to make sure that we're creating something in town that people will embrace and be proud of. And I think one of the questions I have is, how does this work with the developers themselves and the property owners themselves? Because you talked about targeting parcels for development. And I'll share an experience I had yesterday, and Dave I had a woman who lives in development here in town that has a few affordable units. This is East River Farms, Dave. And I had one of the residents there who is very well known to this office, I guess, of her litany of complaints about the project. But she is in an affordable unit. And, she feels that she's been discriminated against in some ways and treated not, in a hostile way by the developer. Now, these are just her accusations, and I don't know if there's a lot of merit to it, but the perception that somehow she's free riding onto the and other people are paying for her being there. And so, there is this view that somehow, me as either a renter or a homeowner am subsidizing my neighbors, right, to be there. And so I'm curious how you wrestled with that, and then also how you worked with property owners to make this happen. I know we have, I think, a successful project that's going to be undertaken in the next, year or two on Cottage Road here in Madison that is going to be affordable units. That was a true partnership with the property owner. But I'm just curious as to how that worked. And when you talked about identifying, because I just know if I were a property owner and I found out that my property was being pulled into this, targeting, my property was being targeted for affordable units, that would be a very tough conversation, I think, to have. So if you wouldn't mind, I don't know if you were involved in those discussions or how it was managed. I think that would be helpful.
So in the first one where we came up with the sites, they were done, based on the state criteria for grant making, which is so many feet, from a bus station, on a transit line. It had to have these certain criteria. And then we knew it needed to have certain septic capacity and be a certain size. And so we came up with a list of I think it was in the 20s. And we were really uncomfortable about presenting that list publicly. And then we thought, we're not singling out two people, this is a group of people, and maybe this is an opportunity and maybe it's not, but these are just places that, could be developed. And the thought about the second grant, when we narrowed that list down to a handful, and then the town did meet with those property owners privately, and I was not involved in those conversations. I would be interested to hear, but in some cases, because they are, fairly well located, most of these people have been approached with development, possibilities. I think they're not, your grandmother or something. They might be large, they're larger parcels and there's families involved, and it gets complicated. But the parcel we ultimately selected was town owned. And so that was I
didn't realize that.
That
Okay.
was some cover
All right.
there. So the town parcel, actually, it used to be a dump. It's adjacent to the train station and it has a daycare on it. So it has a brownfield, a daycare, and it's near transportation. So that is the trifecta of affordable housing planning. So it was an easy choice. So I think we got off the hook there in terms of your question.
Okay.
Yeah. But then it is in a neighborhood of old established houses, and people, had sort of accepted being next to a daycare and a train station, but still it's a big change to have people in your backyard. And so it was a, concern about how we were gonna, lay out the buildings to allow the neighbors to have their privacy and that kind of thing. But I think the developers are very sensitive to this because they know they want to be good neighbors and be welcomed into the community. And, we interviewed a few developers for the project, and they all seemed, very capable. And I would expect, that they would meet your requests to the best that they could about being good neighbors and siting and that kind of thing.
Okay, great. No, that's very helpful, because I think, that is probably one of the more, that's the starting point to even put a project forward, is you have to have a willing participant, to
Yes.
embrace the concept. And I know Dave has a handle on what those possible options could be, but I think it's more just through experience, right, Dave? Have we done a formal assessment of parcels similar to what
We'll be
Guilford
doing that
Road?
as part of this planning process.
Okay.
So that'll be incorporated into this process.
And that might be something that, from just a public education standpoint, presenting to the public what this plan would account, so that there's not, misinformation about other targeting, your property. Did you know that you're on the list or something? That kind of thing, in just terms of communicating, what this is going to encompass here in town.
Right. Well, I think it is a concern, but again, we're not trying to take the property. Like, it would need to be, available for sale for this use. It would be, the owner would know that. So.
May I just follow up and ask? So I heard you say that the town really met with these people, the property owners. Did that happen before you circulated the list?
When we had the big list, that was at a public meeting. And then as we got the list narrowed down, we thought that was a little more private conversation should happen. So I'm not, so we did, weed out once we had the big list and we started to get a little bit more targeted, it got a little bit more confidential. But then eventually that was all, public meeting, that was part of our committee work. So.
And I didn't mean to suggest it wouldn't be public, but my sense of the the town of Madison, and probably a lot of places, is nothing makes people angrier than feeling like there was a secret meeting done
Oh,
about
absolutely. Yeah.
they didn't know. And so this idea, I can imagine seeing a list with your property and saying, what? Whereas I feel like reaching out to the neighbors, reaching out to those property owners and saying, this is what we do, this is what we're talking about, would take a while, but it would be a
Yes.
month or so well spent, so that
Yes.
nobody has that shock value. Because I find in Madison and probably lots of places, once you have that shock, you'll never come down off of it, right? You'll never,
Yeah.
it's not the way to start with any of the communities. So, so I liked what you said about the town talking to people, but I would feel like it's almost even going door to door around and really getting as much education as you can before somebody realizes, you had a secret meeting about me. So.
Right. No, absolutely. And I don't know what you're going to say, Liza, but also as the plan develops too, like once we even had a site, the adjacent neighbors, they really do need tending all the time, even though it's all public, and I think that, that was the part that we sort of like, we had a preliminary plan and we sent that, and that all got discussed. But then, one of the neighbors is a daycare and they had a change in board, and, like it's hard. It's important to really work that communication, because as you're saying it, if you don't know, you just are immediately scared. And, that's.
I think, Peter, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question. So does Guilford have an affordable housing plan per se, like we're trying to create here? Or is there a committee going on in town right now that's doing the same thing that we are?
So we're supposed to be making a plan. I think that committee is being formed, but right now we have the Housing for Economic Development Committee. And that's the committee I'm a part of that's sort of tending this development going forward.
So I have a question.
Peter, sorry, I'm just respond to one thing Peter said. So Guilford was actually the town that suggested that the COG take a larger role in helping the towns develop these affordable housing plans. So they didn't have a committee put together specific for this yet, but sounds like they're in the process.
Okay, thank you.
So the committee that you were all on, so that sounds like it wasn't a town committee. It was a group of community members. Is that right?
Well, yes and no. So the genesis really came from outside the town. The genesis came from this influence of the Guilford Foundation and these other partners that we had, but the town was very receptive to being a part and recognizing that this was a real issue. And again, like the name of the committee that they selected was Housing for Economic Development. I mean, there is a business aspect here that is important to remember as well, because we do have people who work in our communities and they need to be able to live here.
Right.
So
I like that name better, because it does have fewer red flags associated with it, right?
I think that was the name of the grant or something we got that from the state. Yeah.
So were the meetings, they were public meetings that were noticed and everything? I guess
So
I'm wondering.
So this is over, as Liza was saying, a 12-year period. So in the beginning, there was the Guilford Foundation, and they were the convener, and they dragged the town along. And I think, as anyone involved in town politics knows, it takes a group of people who are really feisty to get the town to take action on any particular topic. And so that was the Guilford Foundation. They were established, they had a good community reputation, they were leaders, and they brought the people together to push. And then, we got the 2 grants, we were moving, we had a town committee that was, and that made it very legitimate. And then we started having town meetings. But before then, when we were having speakers about how, everybody needs to buy milk and toilet paper, and people contribute to the economy at all levels, like, all of those sort of, David Fink Partnership for Strong Communities talking points about how we're not going to overwhelm the school system, and, the traffic will be fine. All of those case study things happened in the beginning with David Fink and a grant from the Guilford Foundation. And then we got the state grant to do the land studies, and then that became a town committee.
I also want to just raise up the idea that the controversy of affordable housing. I think that is something that you as a group should push back against and sort of, try in and of yourselves to just, what does affordable housing mean? Who does that impact? It shouldn't be a bad word. It shouldn't, I recognize and acknowledge that there are certain innuendos that come with that, but I think it behooves the leadership to really push back on those preconceptions, because affordable housing is simply that in our very wealthy communities. I mean, we're talking about 70 to 80% of our median income, which is pretty high, right? So I think part of your journey might be to consider just reframing what that means. I mean, and you can look to just no further than Branford. Branford is having a really terrible time right now with renovating some of their affordable housing. And I think in part it's because that the community really is mired in this concept and this image of what affordable housing means. They don't want those people here. And I think it behooves us all to try to combat those stereotypes.
Mhm.
Can we talk? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
Sorry. So if you were to start now, you suggested you kind of missed an opportunity, although it was 10 years ago, to start with equity and inclusion and justice in a sense. Would you start with that? Would that be your lead now if you were to start again? Or would you continue or go back and kind of like the baby step approach of?
Well, I think that's a great question. And I think you understand the politics of your community better than I do. And I think it would be sort of you need to sort of assess where your community is. But, so I think starting with the fact, there are two places you could either come from, you're required to have 10% of affordable housing stock by mandate, right? You could start there and then it already feels sort of punitive. Or you can start on the other end that says, my mother can't downsize from her home and still live in Madison. My child is graduating from graduate school and wants to work at a public school and can't find a home. So you can sort of start from either place. But so I would obviously encourage you to start from it's a real need. I mean, this isn't like fake. This is actually a need that our communities have. And then build, and then I would encourage you throughout that, if it comes up, these issues of, affordable housing, who's going to come in? And then I might say, there are issues of equity and segregation in Connecticut. And I think as leaders, we need to be, mindful and ahead of that as well. So I guess that doesn't fully answer the question, but I would start with the need of the town and not shy away from the diversity and equity and inclusion.
And if I may, I think that's something that this committee is going to address. I mean, just the last time we heard from David Fink, he said something about changing the name. And some of you may have gone home and thought, I kind of like that. I'm sure we all had our own reactions, but it's exactly what we're talking about here. Is that a missed opportunity? As someone who has kept my own name when I got married, I then hyphenated my children's name, and people said all the time, that's going to be terribly confusing to people. And I thought, not if I explain it. And so I always believe in calling a spade, but then really getting people behind what you're talking about. If you call it affordable housing, it is still workforce housing. It is still. But one thing I really want to ask you, I know you keep saying you sort of missed an opportunity. And I think Matt and everyone, what they're saying is it's a different day. We lived through last year and it's a different world. And so it is about listening to our community, but also maybe talking about what we mean. And I guess what I've wondered all the time with these affordable housing is we do have some small pockets of diversity groups, like for example, the ABC homes. And I'm wondering, people sort of see the value of that. They see the value of some of these other senior and disabled housing that's out of the way. Did you ever reach out to those groups to hear like who's on the board of that and why they're on the board of that?
One of the people on our affordable housing board was on our committee. So we tried to get all those groups to be part of it. The other thing I would say on this too is that, we did talk to the schools, and the schools said there are so many studies that kids who learn you listen better when you talk to someone who is a little different, because you have to actually listen, you have to pay attention, and that fosters better dialogue. And they were on board. And now, I'm not sure if you're having the same conversation, but having had an Indians mascot for a number of years, we are neck deep in the discussion of diversity, equity, inclusion in our schools. And it is a wonderful way to start a community discussion, as uncomfortable as it is making everybody with great frequency. So it's been a good opportunity for us here. And I don't know if you have, really taken that on the same way in your school district, but I know that we had a meeting with the country school, it's kind of coming, right?
It's coming. And I think the school board is actually having these kinds of conversations. I think there's multiple ways to talk about it. There's also about what do we put forward to the public as the face of town government and the face of the school districts as mentors and educators and coaches.
Mm-hmm.
You need diversity at that level to send positive messages to children, right? And we have very little diversity in town staff. We have very little diversity in our teaching staff. So there's all kinds of things, many facets of how to broaden people's thinking and provide our children a more diverse environment to grow up in. I grew up in a much more diverse environment. I lived in different parts of the country, and it was much more mixed ethnically. And then I lived in Manhattan for 15 years. So it was kind of astounding to come to Connecticut and really learn about the culture here. And but I also think, to the points that what I've seen is a big transfer over the last, year or so about recognition of some of these things. And, and I think that there is, and people are embracing these concepts now more. And I think part of this is assessing. We stepped back and talked earlier about what are the community needs. And I'm assuming survey work, I think, would be really helpful to really gauge that about what people think. There's the to be honest, the selfish purposes, because people have their own situations where they feel, and I tell you, I knocked on thousands of doors in Madison, and I heard over and over again about people wanting to downsize, seniors struggling. I went through that experience with my own mother, trying to find her a place to live in Madison because she wanted to be close to us. And it was a struggle, a huge struggle. And so you have, that component that is a real need. And I think that having that data as part of a survey work and really knowing what the community wants. And I think layering into that survey is trying to understand a little bit more about how people want to see their community evolve. And I don't know how you do that in a survey, but I think it would be helpful to support the work that you guys are undertaking. Because no one wants to be told that they have to be something, right? They want to feel this is working on behalf of them, this committee, right? I would think, so.
Right. And the other piece,
David, I think, offered us a lot of resources for that purpose. Information that's available. Not to say that we don't need to do additional. I mean, I think a lot of what we're talking about here, this committee has talked about quite a bit as far as the why and the real importance of changing, and as David said, deflating the myths about affordable housing. So if I could just switch gears to sort of the practical side, I'd love to hear from you guys about what was effective ways to engage the community. You've talked a little bit about engaging leadership and business leaders, but one of the challenges we have, and I'm sure Guilford does too, because people are busy and you're busy with their own lives, is how do we effectively get the attention of people so that we can get the message across?
So if I could put back, just how do we get their attention early before that's what I agree.
And then people, because then people start reacting very negatively. So how do we engage people in this discussion for all the different purposes? Let's talk about what the need is. Let's talk about what this community would like to see. How do we, I would love to hear some practical advice on that.
Right, from the beginning before we've made the decisions. Yeah,
Exactly.
because then we get their attention. I've seen when Madison's attention is raised, it's raised everywhere. Yeah.
Right. So what you want to do is you actually want those people to be your partners and your advocates. So
Mm.
what we found effective and continue to find effective is to present the information, and you can invite, you probably know who the movers and shakers and the influencers are in Madison. Uh, um, it was super helpful to have the Guilford Foundation involved because we invited the nonprofit organizations, and they tend to want to please us so that we would look favorably on their grant applications. So, and reach out. So those influencers, and so it's business, it's important to have like the social services because people love basic needs. I mean, you have a really strong basic needs group in Madison. I would encourage them to come and then, have someone present the data, and it can even be just David Fink or someone to say, here's Madison, like, what do you think about that? What are you experiencing in your communities? And then hear that feedback from them that then builds the case, right? So you'll hear from, like Peggy just mentioned, she had this issue herself with her mother. So it's like, oh my gosh, Peggy too, like, this is a real problem. And, and then folks begin to feel like part of the solution, I think. So you have, a session where you go over the data and you all sort of come to agreement and say, oh yes, so these, what should we do next? And then, you may have some ideas about that, or you may learn something from these. I mean, this isn't like an exercise in just trying to please people. You genuinely want their input and their feedback because they may know things you don't know. They may know of a parcel. They may know of something that you're not thinking about. And then I would say, so that once we had that sort of community engagement to start with in those sessions, you could consider, because yours is coming from a different starting point, you could consider small parlor meetings. I guess this is pre-COVID. I don't know what to do now. Everything. But
we do those
They're
virtually.
always done.
We've done them virtually. It can work.
yeah.
Right.
But I would consider bringing in the Madison Foundation, and the social services for sure, whoever does the affordable housing right now, and just listen and try to just build up those stories. And then, for the Guilford Foundation, we funded a grant to create this video that we then sort of said, come and see our video. And so we had a community meeting where we brought in David Fink again to sort of talk about the issue of housing. And then we had Selah, I think we had a couple of different people just talking about housing in general. And this might be an area where you bring in someone to talk about diversity, equity, and just to sort of touch at all of these pieces and say, this is a huge issue. We're talking about zoning laws too. We're talking about taxes. We're talking about all these things. But what we're focusing on right now is increasing the affordable housing stock that we have in our community. And, just ironically, Mary Jo and I have been working on this for over a dozen years, and we now are getting 16 units developed, which feel like when you say it like that, you're like, oh my gosh, that's really not very much. But, it's sort of the on-ramp. So I think, again, Erin, sorry, I'm sort of going on.
No, it's all good information.
But to summarize, I would say there were two key things. We had Partnership for Strong Communities helped us write a survey, and we distributed that as widely as we could. We asked the town to help, they put on their listserv. We asked the library, they pushed it to their folks. We asked the school to help, they sent it to their parents. And we got actually a pretty good number of responses. And then we took those responses and we said, look, this is what people said they need. This is the need that we're hearing about. And then we did do the video. We curated, a group of people to tell their story. And we showed that in a big public meeting. And then we took that on the road. That went to the Rotary, that went to churches, that went to any place we could go, along with those little community fact sheets that David has about what's affordable housing mean in, this town. And he has a bunch of, Partnership for Strong Communities has a bunch of flyers about, the deflating the myth that are very helpful. And and I used to carry those things around, like they would, give them to people. And I think it really is, you have to, I don't know exactly how you do it now, but you really need to just get that in front of people. And then when we would have that meeting where we're going to present the limited number of lots and we're concerned about how this is going to freak out the neighbors, we showed that video about what their neighbors said about their needs beforehand, and it just took it down a notch. Like people were like, oh, okay, this is why we're here, we have a need. And so it was, I think it was very helpful in taking out the sort of combativeness of it, because it's starting from the need. And I think you might be starting from needing to do a plan, but as once you peel the top off of that, I'm sure you're already seeing it, that you have a need for this and it will make your town better.
So our time is slowly coming to an end, but this is so helpful. I feel like we have a million questions for you. And so I do want to make sure that people who have a few questions, and if I want to throw out, I know you have a Guilford Housing Authority that we haven't even talked about, and maybe it would open too much right now, that's fine, and whether you ever worked with them. And I heard you say that you had an interfaith group that you tried to engage, but it didn't quite go. And we do have, the only real affordable housing we have here was started by an interfaith group. So if you have time to talk about that, but I don't want to monopolize, and I don't know if other people have questions that you feel like they're here now. We will keep in contact because I think we have a lot of questions, as you can see.
Well, this is, as Liza said, we're in it for 12 years now, so we're not going anywhere.
Well, you made me feel better knowing that you did it for 12 years, so we've only been doing it for,
we only have 2, but that's okay.
Well, I think I'm sorry.
Andrea.
Did you utilize social media at all? Or did you really stay away from that?
We definitely posted the video through social media. I mean, I'm a big fan of transparency. So, once you start putting those needs out, I mean, that actually might be something I don't know what your plan has to entail, but what I was reflecting on as Mary Jo was talking is, I think like phase 1 was just education and information gathering. And that's really critical. And like moving slowly to bring people along seemed to make a big impact. And Sarah, to your question, I would say that the housing authority in Guilford is very focused on seniors and the disabled, right? So it's not their focus is not around affordable housing. That's really not part of their mission. So we included them, but they, I don't think were, they're very focused. Like also the mutual housing in our community was also started by our interfaith housing group. So if you have that, I would definitely reach out to them. And consider them as a real ally as well, because those are folks who already care about the issue and who have some experience in developing it. But
may I just ask, so and I apologize that I didn't know this, the Guilford Housing Authority, is it all senior and disabled housing, and it doesn't have any just low income housing? No, it's all senior and disabled.
It's not part of their charge to do that.
Yeah.
So they'd have to, change their mandate.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Their buildings they're senior and disabled. I gotcha. Okay.
And they talked about expanding it, but that's the most hardworking volunteer board I know of. I mean, those folks are at their wits' end, and I'm not sure what's going on in your interfaith housing people, but they, these are people with needs and issues, and they have to, meet them and collect the rent. I mean, it's a big project, and they have their hands full, and they're always trying to build more housing. I mean, it's like, they just seem like tapped out folks. I think it's good to invite them in. You'll learn a lot, but
that's true.
they're heavy lifting now.
Yeah. And at the same time, their affordable housing is safe, right? Because it's seniors and the disabled. Those are sort of like, they feel like a safe group to be promoting versus like low income families who, by the way, will also enter your schools, right? And help keep your school system
And they
engage.
have their needs, like, this is fun about talking to them. They're like, if you have seniors, do you want a family living next door? Like, those people go to bed early. They don't want to hear your kids, It's
Well,
just, like, it's
the
really
government has
interesting
already
when you.
decided that senior and disabled housing makes sense. That's a topic for many, many seminars.
Right. Nobody agrees with that.
In America.
Exactly. It did
And
not.
no senior or disabled. Yeah, it doesn't really, but that's not for us. Right. So this is helpful just in terms of thinking about community partners. I have one, like, again, sewers comes up all the time, and where, there's this idea of where it must be. And do you find we should follow that? Because again, my sense of people is that when things are pushed over to land that's not really used, that's not in the center of everything, that works better for people than, the things that are right in the center of town. But I know then there's this idea it must be. And, the very poor in Connecticut, has anyone done studies about how many people use public transportation? Because I come from Chicago, where that was a must, but then public, nobody owned cars. I find the working poor here
Need to have a car.
Even low, very low, even people way below the poverty line own cars. So I don't know if does that ever come up or is that something you survey, or do you understand my question? Like, is that?
I do. We talked about that because the state just handed down the guidelines to get the money to do this grant. It's going to be near transit, but we expect everybody there will have a car. And I think that's, we're suburban, we have to expect that. But if you don't need a car, like I have a 16-year-old, does he need a car? It would be lovely if he didn't, if he could walk everywhere he needed to get to and had opportunities to go to work that way. So I think it's something to try for, but
Well, and I think that's part of the study itself was, here are the factors that seem critical to the best location for this.
Right.
And transportation was a part of that. So, sewer/septic was a part of that.
And I'm sure
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, your town planner will tell you this too. There's where we are today, but if we build this, it'll be there in 100 years. And what do we want then? The location of things is a strategic and important. And you don't want it to be isolated. You want it to be part of the community. Yeah.
Although we are having an affordable housing unit built, or scattered
site
housing built not near real public transportation right now. There's a private developer now who has come in and purchased a lot and is doing some work. So that feels really good too, that it's expanding.
I just had one quick comment. Liza, I'd love to reach out to you and talk about the Guilford Foundation some more, because I'm president of the Madison Foundation.
Oh, congratulations.
So we have something in common. Pardon me?
I said you want to get involved in housing.
Well, I was nominated, let's put it that way. And so, I mean, your role is something we would not have done necessarily at the foundation. So I was just curious. Well, I'll call you separately on that.
Perfect.
And I know you've talked to Jenny Simpson before as well. So yeah. I just want to introduce myself quickly.
Thank you. I'm really glad you made that. Thanks. I'd love to talk.
Likewise.
I also wanted to just amplify something that Sarah said about septic systems, because I think, it is a limitation to development in Connecticut, and it is a particular burden on affordable housing. And there are alternative systems that other states allow that Connecticut does not. And I don't know why our Department of Health is so overburdened and restrained, but I would wonder if there can't be more alternatives that are available, because it is a significant barrier, and it's not a topic that's often addressed.
It's certainly a driver for Madison, whether it's a housing or commercial development. It's certainly, and I know Guilford has the same experience, it does create a limitation. And I think historically that was kind of seen as a positive, right? It kept things more rural in nature and less developed. But I think now as we transition forward and start seeing that people want different amenities and different lifestyle choices today, that we have to kind of adapt to that. So I know our town is going to be spending a lot more focusing on how do we address that, sewer septic kind of issue in our downtown center area, and how to tackle those issues. Because I think also in the long run, this is also going to create environmental problems. And the positive is a lot of this, if some of these bills pass at the federal level, there actually might be, federal dollars available for some infrastructure projects for things just like this. So it kind of all ticks on a lot of things that we recognize need to happen. And so I'm not talking about, massive sewer systems, but as you said, something that is functional, that allows a little bit more expansion and capacity, that can address local issues and also protect, the environment. Because we have people who still even have like cesspool systems and things like that down south of Route 1. So it is a challenge. One thing I just wanted, pardon?
I'm really sorry. I have to hop off because I've got another call at 9:30, but I'm so interested in this. So I want to hear what you have to say, but I might leave. I might have to scoot out as the conversation winds down. I'm sorry, and I'm just apologizing.
We want to thank you both
Yes, thank
really
you.
for coming to this. You've offered a lot of information, and we will be back in touch, I'm sure. So if you have to hop off, that's fine.
Thank you.
But thank you. It really was very helpful.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
was great.
Sorry, I have to leave.
Peggy, did you want
Bye.
to finish your thought?
Yeah, no, well, thank you. And I just was gonna, in terms of to the committee, the one thing that might be helpful is you try to explore reaching out to these different groups as part of COVID. The town has a infrastructure for this now. It's the Long-Term Recovery Committee. So we actually have certain, we have sector groups, and we have contact lists, and we have town staff that are responsible for different sectors. And so it might be helpful if you want to have, a communication strategy to the churches, then Austin Hall and Scott Cochran are the primary contact people for that. So during COVID, we've used them as a channel to get to those parts. Dave is economic with the chamber and economic development. So we can share that with you, just in terms of helping you have a contact list and who to go to as a starting point as you try to reach out to different parts of the town.
Absolutely. That's helpful. Thank you. Mary Jo, thank you for coming in. And, I think this is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. So thank you for agreeing to spend this hour with us. And something tells me we will see you again very soon, in some capacity. Does
Mary
anyone
Jo,
Happy to help.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you.
go ahead.
Mary Jo, is the video that you presented to the town, is it on the Guilford website? Are we able to take a look at it?
I think it's on the Guilford Foundation website still.
Okay.
I actually have it posted on our company is CK Architects, and it is on our website.
We just forward the link to Dave.
Yeah, I could do that.
That's all right. You can promote it that way. Good for you for not telling us that it was there at first. But that's fine.
Peter, I'll look it up and I'll forward it. I'll definitely send the CK Architects website link,
That's
because
right.
there's also beautiful pictures on there that you'd want to look
All
at.
right.
There's so the other thing we did with the video too is we did a short one where people just wrote on a whiteboard and held it up that said, "We need affordable housing because," and people would fill it in. And then we had ones where we're talking. So the one is shorter, and it was kind of interesting to do both, because also if you just see people with a little sign and it's something you just flip up, you can just scroll that in the back of a meeting, and people see people they know and whatever.
My other question was, could you explain the scattered sites and how large of a plot of land do they have to have these scattered sites on?
So one of the things we had a local resident, Betty Augustin, who was for a long time the head of the housing partnership here. And she really felt that there was a stigma assigned to people who grew up in an affordable housing development. And we have one of those on Apple Tree Lane in Guilford. And she felt like those kids went to school feeling like all the other kids knew that's where they lived. And so she was very vocal and reiterated to us that there should be a mix of cost housing in the things you do so that nobody has to feel like that. And so when we talk about a scattered site, the thought was that it wouldn't be a development of 20 homes along a road where they were all affordable, but there would be maybe a house here and a house there, and they were all over town, and that was desirable. And I can see that point. And also we did some talking with Habitat for Humanity about their work, and they like to do them in pairs, because if you are a minority person moving into a community where you are a real minority, you might not feel super comfortable all the time. And it's nice to have a neighbor and that's a little bit more like you. And so that was another sort of philosophy about it that we heard. So I think, I don't know that there's a right answer, but these are all things we're thinking about.
And we can talk about that. Scattered site is sort of, it's like the future wave of, for a long time now, a lot of public housing is, and scattered site can be done in many ways. So it could be, in urban areas, you'll see 20 together, and some are market rate and some are affordable. So then you can't know what is what. So, but that's, we can delve into.
But I think somebody brought up, it's a good point, that if you have a condo association and one of those 5 units is affordable, those other 4 units subsidize the HOA fees on that unit. And that can lead, in perpetuity, could that lead to resentment among residents?
Well,
Yes.
There's a lot to talk about with scattered site. Of course, developers are subsidized, but nobody talks about that. Nobody has the animosity towards the developers who are actually, and of course, there's some research in scattered site that when there's a problem, people assume, sometimes they focus on the affordable housing, and that was a chronic problem in Chicago, where I was from. And so that it was, it must be, but that's, probably more than we can tackle today. But I appreciate it, Mary Jo, very much. And I think we'll all be back in touch. So thank you for your time and for doing this today.
Yes, I welcome the opportunity, and I look forward to other chances for our committees to work together. I think that would be lovely.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you.
If we can all stay on just to get next.
I'm going to hop off though. I'll let you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah, I have to jump off as well.
Yeah, so do I, Sarah.
Sorry.
The only thing I was going to do is next, we're having our next meeting is going to be on Fridays again.
Right.
So as long as we have that confirmed, I think we can figure out who, maybe Dave will work to send a list of who's going to be taking the minutes. And then we'll, if you have ideas for agenda, why don't you send them to me if there are people you feel like we should be speaking to for next week. But I realize the time is late. So if you all need to jump off, you can send those, maybe send those to Dave and to me. Does that make sense, Dave?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So
thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.